here. Thank you so much for coming to our session on sense of belonging in the e-learning classroom. Most of you have been to one of our sessions before, but let me introduce ourselves. I'm Sharon Sheehan. All of us are co-presenting today. So Matt Berkey is here. He's a world language teacher, Marshall Harris, English teacher, and Caitlin Reichert, so special ed teacher. And I'm a math teacher, and we're all instructional coaches at Glenbrook South. And today is our last summer session, so we're very happy to have you here. We want to preface this presentation by just acknowledging the kind of difficulty I think we all are in our minds in terms of how are we going to create this sense of belonging in an e-learning classroom. We're all used to doing it in our own traditional classrooms, and you know, we had our experience in the spring, but now on Wednesday, we're going to be walking into an e-learning classroom where most of us won't know most of our students. And so what we're going to talk about today is really some of the bigger picture ideas about the importance of sense of belonging, and also some of the structures to think through how you can create that in this environment. So just a few things before we really dig in. Keep your mics muted. Unless you have a question, then please feel free to unmute yourself so you can ask it at the time. That just cuts down on the background noise. Some of you have already accessed the chat. Please feel free to do that. With all of us here, we'll be able to monitor it, and we can jump in and answer questions or answer them in chat. And then we will stick around for about 10 minutes after if you have any other questions or you want to discuss with the group, just stick around for that. As you can see up in the corner, we are recording this session. All of our sessions have been recorded, and they're on our website where you signed up all summer. Also, the PDFs are linked there, so if you ever want to come back and, you know, oh, I remember a slide from this or that, they'll be there. We'll just leave them up there all year. So you have access to that. And then please, if you have a colleague who wants to watch one of the videos, please direct them to where they are. We will share the attendance link at the end of the session, as we always do. You must fill it out to get paid and to get your CPDUs. And for GBS teachers, remember, we're here to support you in the oncoming weeks. And then I know we all have technology questions and that kind of thing, and district is available for that as well. So what is a sense of belonging? What do we mean by this? Cobb and Cranapple, in their book, Belonging Through a Culture of Dignity, which is a summer book reading group at Glenbrook South, and will be our fall book as well, defines it to be the extent to which people feel appreciated, validated, accepted, and treated fairly within an environment. So in schools, classrooms, work, and they really talk about the importance of this in learning. So, and just before I jump into the slide, you can look at it, but the structure of this presentation really comes from Cobb and Cranapple's book. And also, those of you who are at Glenbrook South, you might remember Cranapple was our speaker in March. So he also talked about this, and you probably saw this chart then. And then it also comes from a website that we found about creating a sense of belonging. It was for a college university courses, and a whole course on how to create a sense of belonging for their university course. So in this diagram, this comes out of Cobb and Cranapple's book, and they utilize those hierarchy of needs to describe the importance of belonging for students. And the sense of not belonging, as you can see in the diagram, hinders academic performance. And then if you take the opposite look at that, the research does show that sense of belonging, students who feel like they belong have a greater academic success, are more persistent and more likely to complete their work, and they're more comfortable and happy and engaged in their learning. So, as you know, those of you who've come to our presentations, we anchor all of our work in Hattie's research. And Hattie is a researcher who looks at mega studies, and he combines effect sizes from various studies to really show the world actually like how different items impact student learning. So he looks at everything from things outside of school to things inside of school. And of course, we're more concerned of things that we can do within the school. But he uses 0.4 as what he has determined represents 1 year of learning in 1 year's time. So anything bigger than that is definitely what we want to aim for, because those are the items where we can increase student learning. So in terms of this presentation today, we have 4 things that he's found that are directly related to sense of belonging. And the first one is student self-efficacy. And that comes in at a 0.71. And we're going to talk about that in a little while, about different strategies to build that so that we can get that higher impact on our student outcomes. The second one is teacher-student relationships. And by building those relationships, we can, and have strong ones, we can have a strong impact on student learning. That's coming in at a 0.72, which is also a very strong effect size. The third one, cooperative learning. And all of us know the importance of that in class and try to create that in terms of our traditional classrooms. It has an effect size of 0.59. So we'll discuss some strategies for how we can do that in an e-learning environment. And then the last one is a big one, student expectations. And it has an effect size of 1.44. So it really increases the rate at which students learn when we can do that. Marshall's going to talk about this a little bit later and really define it again, because what Hattie means by student expectations might not be the first think. He's talking about a teacher finding out what students' expectations of him or herself are, and then pushing the learner to exceed those expectations, their own personal expectations. So once they have performed at a level that's beyond their own, he or she gains confidence in his or her own learning ability. So it's that process, that whole process, that has this big impact. So Marshall's going to talk about it again, and he'll talk about some ways to possibly do that in the e-learning environment. So then the question, as I've stated a few times now, becomes, how do we do this in the digital space? How do we create that sense of belonging? I think most of us know, I mean, we can always get better at it, but we have kind of a sense and a natural way of doing it in our traditional classrooms. So to really think through, how on Wednesday are we going to start building this sense of belonging? And there are 3 key areas we're going to look at today. We're going to look at identity, space, and community. And we'll define these more deeply as we go into each of the spaces today. But Caitlin will get us starting off by discussing student identity.
Thanks, Sharon. So like Sharon mentioned, our first key is identity, which is students' attitudes and beliefs about themselves and how they're encouraged to develop. And we know that identity and equity have been our school's focus for some time now. However, we haven't really considered or planned for how to promote student identity within this new remote learning space. So how can we use identity to help students feel that sense of belonging at the beginning of a school year without seeing everybody in person? In the upcoming slides, we'll discuss key questions around student identity in e-learning and how to encourage that identity at the start of a school year. So here are the 3 key questions that we can consider that place an emphasis on student identity. First, how have students' interests been incorporated into your content to make your course even more relevant to their lives? Next, how do you design learning experiences that foster a growth mindset, identity, and motivation for student learning? And how are students encouraged to reflect on their experiences throughout your course and what they've achieved? When I look at these keys, the first and third key really focus on that student-teacher relationship, while the second key really highlights the importance of self-efficacy and students' belief that they can achieve in a new environment, especially in the beginning of a new school year. And as Sharon explained earlier, each of our belonging keys relate to some of John Hattie's effect sizes. So when considering identity in the digital space, there are 2 clear ways that teachers can positively impact students. With student self-efficacy and teacher-student relationship. And in order for Hattie's effect sizes to work, teachers must do this with consistency and fidelity across their class. So student self-efficacy and our students' belief that they can achieve success in e-learning is crucial. And while many of the routines and familiarities of school feel like they've been taken away from us, that teacher-student relationship is now really more important than ever to foster, especially in our first few weeks. And so when you're planning for student sense of belonging, you can ask yourselves, what ways can I add more self-efficacy? How can we bolster that student-teacher relationship, especially in August and September? And if you're specifically interested in finding activities to develop that teacher-student rapport, feel free to visit our coaching website. There's linked activities in the slide deck for building community with new students. The first section of that presentation has some links that you can use specifically about teachers and students connecting. So to increase students' sense of belonging as it relates to their identity online, you can look at these overarching identity practices when you're planning your e-learning lessons and activities. So for example, first, you could periodically survey students' preferences and interests in order to gain insight and to enhance their classwork during e-learning. You can also provide students with opportunities to develop their self-efficacy skills so that they see their e-learner identity as a positive one, which is really important, especially at the beginning of the year. We know there are going to be grades and assessments, and we want students to feel comfortable in this new space, no matter how it went for them in the spring. And then you could also offer students a variety of reflection opportunities in order for students to assess their understanding, their comfort within the environment, and their progress toward student learning or your course learning targets. And since we're starting this new school year in e-learning, we do have the opportunity to take time out of our classes at the beginning of these first few weeks to establish these approaches to fostering student identity. And now I'm going to share some targeted activities that you can incorporate into your classes that can promote that sense of belonging and embrace identity. So you might be asking yourself in practical terms, how can I encourage student identity in my classroom or within my role at South or North or off campus? So first, you can develop some activities where students can express themselves and their identity in your virtual classroom environment. So consider offering activities that include student choice and voice, so students are able to demonstrate their understanding or their personality by incorporating interests into the content. You can also create specific student identity activities as they relate to your content or just about students as a whole. It's really important to allow students to share who they are and what makes them who they are. So you can create these community building activities during the first week of school where they share pieces about themselves. And another kind of tech way for students to show who they are is you're able to adjust your name in Zoom. If you click on the box, there's some little dots on the right and you can click rename. Allow students to add their pronouns so they can share more about their identity. And this practice is also being shared at GBS. Saga is meeting with student services to let them know about this option as well. This is a good Zoom feature. And next, you can offer students individual check-ins or office hours using Zoom or phone calls. And I think it's no matter how hard we're trying to connect with students via technology, we do lose some of that human component by not being able to see each other in person. So one of the best ways to develop that digital teacher-student relationship is to use Zoom for those check-ins or those office hours. And we've done a lot of research, and many universities believe that checking in one-to-one or face-to-face is a really strong strategy to developing that rapport. So setting up one-to-one meetings with students not only just shows them that we care about them as a whole, but then we get that face time with them or voice time if it's by phone, especially important at the start of a new school year. Next, you can create some growth mindset activities as students work to develop that remote learner identity, again, so that they see it in a positive light. And finally, after students complete assignments as you get into the school year, you can offer for them to fill out a Google form reflection that really reflects on their experience as it relates to your course, their identity, and your content. And seeking out student input is really critical, especially since we're new to this situation as well as educators. we can learn from a lot from our students' perspective. For example, I worked one-to-one with a colleague during e-learning in the spring, and she surveyed her class regarding identity and engagement just to see how they were doing in this new space. And some of that insight that she gained was really important, and she was able to actually adjust some of her lesson plans based on what the students had voiced in that survey. So now Matt is going to share more about our second key, which is space.
Thanks, Caitlin. So we all know how critical space is. It's one of the 4 domains in Danielson, and it's something that we worked really hard on as a community. But what our space looks like is going to be drastically different than what it normally looks like with our in-person interactions. And so how can we create an online space where we can provide help, course materials, and interaction in a positive and productive way that's also manageable for us as teachers? So some of the key questions are considering questions related to equity for our diverse sets of learners from different cultures, races, socioeconomics, gender, and sexuality or abilities. Is there an online space where learners and staff can meet to continue to encourage and develop a sense of belonging to get help? And what tools can we manage all of this? Because that's also a big piece of it, and trying to find tools that we're comfortable with and tools that we know that we can use in a reliable way and aren't one more thing to add to our list. So how are we building space? It's really through those student-teacher relationships that we know are so pivotal and key to furthering learning and creating a positive environment. So in this, there are a few ways that we can organize our space to create positive relationships. So one of the ways is, how are students going to meet with us when they need help or when they need something? And so it's thinking through what normally we take for granted of students walking into our office or students, you know, hanging back after class. Some of those things are going to be a bit more challenging. And so what are some ways that we can manage those individual student interactions? One of the ways would be organizing appointments with our Google Calendar. And one of the nice things about that is it stays within our Google sphere, while also giving us the opportunity to meet one-on-one with students in a manageable way. So what you would do to do this is you would go to your calendar. We all have a Google Calendar, even if you haven't used it before. And what you would do is, so let's say you have block 2 free, and you want to be able to meet with students. So you would just drag your appointment, and then you would come over here, and instead of event, which is the default, you would click appointment slots. You're going to want to give kids, and then you want to make sure you pick the right calendar. There we go. And you want to be able to let kids make appointments. And so they can be any time duration. 30 minutes is the only thing that looks good on the calendar. If you go too short, the way that they stack and nest on your calendar kind of looks sloppy, and it could be challenging for the kids to figure out what slot is where. So you might not want a 30-minute appointment with a kid, but if you're looking for a clean view, it's one of the cleanest ways to do it. And then you just hit save. You could come in here, and then you would click this go to appointment page. This is what it's going to look. The kids aren't going to see all of this. The only thing that they're going to be able to see is this appointment slot right here. I'm in my own calendar, which is why you can see everything. But this is what it looks like for them. So it just says appointment, appointment, and then they would come in and click on appointment. It says who is making the appointment by default. I'm making my own appointment, and then all they have to do is they click that button and they click save, and now they've made an appointment with you. The appointment slot will disappear, and that's it. So then you could insert a Zoom link. You can have that be the default to put Zoom links in there. And for the kids to be able to see this page, all you have to do is share this link with them on your Google Classroom. So it's a quick, efficient way. You'll get an email, so you don't have to constantly be checking to see what's happening or to see if people are making appointments. It kind of keeps everything in your own workflow without having to go out of there, and reminds or lets kids be able to make appointments with you. So that's a really handy way to do that. The only thing that you would want to be aware of or thinking about is continually reminding kids to make appointments with you, because they're either not going to feel comfortable after a while because they'll feel like maybe that's not a thing that you're wanting anymore, or they'll forget. So continually reminding kids. Another way to do that would be to create a Google form. So you can organize your time with Google Forms. And so you could have a Google form up for appointments, where kids could come in and fill out times when you're available to make appointments with you. And then what you can do to manage that, because otherwise you're going to have a Google form that you're continually checking, is you can come in, and after you've made your form, you would just click responses, and you see these 3 dots over here. If you click these 3 dots, you can get email notifications for new responses. So this is a really handy way to, for a form that you're not either using constantly, or for a form that you're occasionally going to be getting information. Getting email notifications for new responses is really nice, because the minute someone submits the form, you get an email to go check that. So I have a place for late work, and so kids can fill out the late work form and submit it. I don't want to check that every day because kids aren't turning in late work every day, but I get an email to remind me. Or if I want kids to sign up for an appointment, that's not going to happen all the time every day. But if I do this, I get an email to remind me to check it. So it continues to be in my workflow and in a space where I can remember without being an additional burden for me, while still providing that space for kids to feel like they can reach out to me and we can still work together in that way. And then the third idea for creating a space is this idea of a shared space for uplifting messages. And so how can we use our Google Classroom to be a place where we can share uplifting messages and create that sense of community when we are all far apart? So I have a friend in Ohio who is great at creating community. She's a theater teacher and it's been one of her big strengths as a teacher. And during the spring, she had a spirit week every week where she changed the theme and had kids she had kids emailing her pictures. I wouldn't do that because that'd be a lot of work. I've got another idea. But emailing her pictures that fit with the theme, and then she would put all those pictures together and then create this JPEG picture that she would post on the classroom website every week. And so it's just a great way for kids to feel like they're together, they're all working towards the same goal, and to see each other's faces in sharing that shared identity. I wouldn't have kids email me all of those pictures because that would be a lot of work. What I would do is I would create a Google Drawings page, and then it's part of our suite and it's called Google Drawings. And then kids can drop all of their pictures onto that. And then all I would have to do as the educator is arrange all the pictures so they're not on top of each other, add the message, and then save it and send it. That way I'm not trying to figure out where all the pictures are, save the pic. That just sounds like a lot to me. But all I would have to do is spend 5 minutes reorganizing what the kids had dropped in to create this. And so it's a manageable way for us to create that sense of community and that shared space, even though we're not together. So we need to make sure that we're encouraging students by checking in with them and constantly reminding them that the ways that we're creating space are still available, because they are gonna either forget or feel anxious like they're bothering us. And we wanna make sure that we continually repeat that message that they're not bothering us, that this is just a new and different way for us to all connect. Encouraging feedback, as Caitlin said, and reflection on the e-learning experience. the beauty of having these classes with these kids is that they're going to have 6, 7 other classes where they're having these experiences in e-learning. And so what are our colleagues doing in other disciplines that is having a positive impact on students? And by getting that feedback from kids, we can leverage that to create a more positive space by using some of the things that our colleagues are doing. And then just continually reminding kids about our appointments, about the space, and how we're all in this together. In maintaining this, you just need to figure out the way that's best for you and the way that you feel most comfortable. Some people don't like using the calendar. Don't use the calendar. Use Google Forms and have them send you an email. Some people would rather keep a tab open and not have a bunch of emails come in. Use the tab. Find the way that works best for you, because that's the only way it's going to be manageable. Remember that we're always purposefully working on our relationships with students, because that really is a linchpin in all of this. And then you want it to be easy for kids, obviously, but it also needs to be easy for you. And I know I've said that a few times, but this e-learning environment, we all are going back to our first year of teaching, essentially. And so how can we make this easy for me while still providing the students with what we need to provide them? And that needs to be just the message that we keep repeating to ourselves.
So the third and final key to building a sense of belonging that we want to talk about is building community. So if you think about what Caitlin was referring to when she talked about identity, if you think about that as how a student interacts internally with him or herself and how we can foster that dialogue, that internal dialogue. And then if Matt's slides were about how students interact with the digital space and how you build a sense of belonging there, this third realm, community, you can think of as how students are going to interact with each other and with you as their teachers, in terms of building as authentic relationships as possible to foster that sense of belonging. So the key questions in this realm is how can you encourage students to contribute to discussions in the ways that you would in the classroom? How do you support students in collaboration? How do you model belonging and respect? And how do you keep yourself engaged with the students? Given the parameters that we know exist around synchronous and asynchronous time, given what we know about not wanting to keep kids looking at screens all day long, it presents some new challenges in terms of building relationships, certainly. And so to be thoughtful about that going in and to be thinking about some of the ideas we're going to present about how to build community can be really, really helpful. So again, returning to Hattie, cooperative learning has this 0.59 effect size. So it definitely accelerates learning when we have kids talking to each other. We all know that. We all do that in the in-person classroom. This other Hattie effect size, this giant one, clear expectations, as Sharon alluded to earlier, it's not simply about letting kids know where you're headed, right? Or articulating learning targets. That's a common misconception. What Hattie's actually referring to when he talks about clear expectations, as Sharon alluded to earlier, is that it's about understanding as a teacher what kids expect from themselves, and then having conversations with them about how they can push beyond what they believe they can do. And so the reason why that's relevant within community and sense of belonging is that it is really difficult to get to know what kids expect from themselves and then to be able to have that authentic conversation about how they can do more if they don't feel like they belong in your classroom and they don't feel like they're part of the community. Zaretta Hammond writes about being a warm demander of kids to push them beyond what they think that they're capable of. But it's very hard to be a warm demander of kids if you don't have that feeling of community in your classroom. And so that if you can get there, if you can build those relationships, build that community, then you can do what Hattie's talking about with clear expectations and have that giant effect size as a result. So how is it built? When we talk about clear expectations, a really good way to start, and we've alluded to Google Forms multiple times in this presentation, but this is one more time where we're going to do it. A great place to start is a Google form. So if you need to find out from kids what they think they're capable of, so asking some really pointed questions of them at the start of the year about their feelings, their expectations, their attitudes about your particular subject area, your discipline, you can learn a lot about them from that Google form. Now, if all of us are doing that, if all of us are hitting kids with Google Forms at the start of the year, as you can imagine, there's going to be some Google Form fatigue for kids. So we have to be mindful of that, certainly. We don't want to ask 30 questions that are open-ended, asking kids to elaborate, but you might consider some Likert scale questions about their attitudes, about your subject area, their ability to connect with the community of learners in your discipline in previous years without forcing them to spend an hour on a Google form. So that's just something to be mindful of. Another thing to be thoughtful of with clear expectations is including video with some of your instructions for asynchronous work. This will help kids who maybe are better at engaging with listening and viewing than they are with reading instructions. If you think about how you might introduce a homework assignment in the in-person classroom, certainly you might show that on your projector, but you're also going to explain it out loud to kids. So including video of yourself explaining assignments would be the equivalent of that. And it's going to make those kids who maybe prefer that delivery style of explanation maybe feel more connected to the community and a larger sense of belonging. In terms of instructional strategies, thinking about collaboration and turn and talk, think, pair, share as instructional strategies can be really, really helpful, of course, in terms of building community. Can be a little bit tricky in Zoom, of course, but breakout rooms are a great, great tool, of course. And if you have not yet done a little bit of hosting in a Zoom session, it's really pretty intuitive to create breakout rooms on the fly. What's challenging is assigning kids to breakout rooms. So to randomize them is pretty simple. To assign them is a little bit more complicated. But what we would encourage you to do in that realm, if you plan to use those strategies, which we hope you do, is make sure you get some Zoom practice before the year starts. Get into a Zoom with some colleagues where you can pass around the hosting and each of you can tinker with those tools a little bit. That last bullet point that you see there, though, protocols, both academic and non-academic, can be really, really vital in the e-learning environment for building community. And so if you think about protocols, what they are is really giving structure to conversations for kids when they're in a collaborative part of your lesson. So we all know that sometimes you might have students who you can ask them a big question and say, hey, get into small groups and grapple with this, and they go for it. But other times, they need a lot of specific instructions. Use this graphic organizer. I want you to each speak for a minute before you move on to the next step. I want you to refer to textual evidence twice in your comments. Those kinds of specific expectations around how they interact, that's what protocols are. Now, I'm referring to academic ones up until now, but where community building can really be affected by protocols is in non-academic protocols in small groups. So, and it eats up time, there's no doubt about it, but that time investment can really be worth it when you're trying to create a sense of belonging for kids. So consider, for example, you put kids in your class into groups of 4 to work on something. But before they get to work on the academic focus of the collaboration, you ask them to go through a non-academic protocol where you're getting them to get to know each other a little bit more. You're building that community, you're building that sense of belonging. Adults, of course, do this really naturally, right? Imagine yourself in a department meeting and your IS says, hey, get into small groups and talk about this thing. certainly the first thing that you do is you start talking about, oh, how was your summer? How's your family, right? Kids don't do that unless we ask them to do that, or most of them don't, right? And so to give them non-academic conversational protocols, especially at the beginning of the year, will really help build that community and that sense of belonging. And you can pop into those breakout rooms too, and you can learn more about students and kind of banter with them around that non-academic talk as well. So how do you maintain this community, this sense of belonging? If you take these steps and you build it in the ways that I've described? Well, one important thing to do is to try to start all your correspondence with kids with a personal connection. It's really easy. We all know how busy we get. It's really easy just to get down to business in our correspondence with kids. But just like we want them to use non-academic talk in their conversations, we want to use non-academic talk with them as well. So a kid emails you with a question about an assignment or about the content of your class, just be mindful of responding first with that personal connection. We all do that quite naturally normally, but like I said, sometimes it can slip off our radar. So just to be mindful of that will help you to maintain that sense of belonging. Also, being selectively vulnerable, this is another Zaretta Hammond idea, can be really effective as well. Oh, I lost the screen. Did other people lose me? I think Matt got kicked out maybe.
Oh, there.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So what Zaretta Hammond means by selective vulnerability is picking and choosing appropriate spots for you to be really open with kids about your own life, especially in e-learning, to acknowledge that for you this is new and for you this can be anxiety provoking and that you're figuring out your way forward just builds a connection with kids. And so when we talk about pushing them past their expectations, if they see your humanity, they of course are going to be more open to you pushing them when it's time to do so academically. Now, of course, you have to draw that line carefully, right? That's why it's selective vulnerability. You don't want to overshare with kids, but just to find those moments where you can make connections with kids by being honest about your own humanity can be really impactful. And then lastly, going back to Google Forms, to not just post that first Google form at the start of the year, get that information from kids and then forget about it. To periodically continue to check in with kids through Google Forms can be a great way to build a sense of belonging through community. And you can ask them questions about how it's going, what's working for them in your class, what's not, both in terms of the content, but in terms of the structure as well. We all are facing a really steep learning curve, of course, with learning in the digital space, and getting feedback from kids will be vital. And then in a synchronous session, you can refer directly to the feedback that you're getting from kids, even if it's a suggestion that you're not going to take, to acknowledge it and thank them for the feedback and maybe even explain, hey, some of you are suggesting that we do this. Here's why I'm not going to do that. It makes them feel heard and connected and makes them feel like they do belong in the classroom, which is what we're aiming for. So once you get that feedback from kids, of course, you're going to build on what's working and change what's not. And that's how you continue to develop the sense of community. And then the last thing that I just wanted to mention, just to help you to be mindful of this, is to make this, as much as possible, part of your course team conversations. We, of course, all know that in our course teams, we tend to go towards instruction and curriculum and assessment as the topics of conversation, which of course is appropriate, makes perfect sense. But in this year, in this unique environment, to also make sure that we're talking about what's working in our different digital spaces in terms of building community is going to be really, really vital. We're going to learn from each other in terms of our successes and our challenges. So in your course teams, just make sure you're bringing that up, asking your colleagues about what's working. So we are, let's see, it's 9:42. And at this point, what we want to do is put you into some breakout rooms so you have some time to chat with colleagues across disciplines and across buildings to consider these 4 questions. And we'll give you a little, maybe 10 or even a few more minutes than that to grapple with these questions together in terms of building a sense of belonging.